Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 11 of Out of Character, the show where your favorite creators drop out of character for an hour to talk with game designer and host Marc Tassin, that's me, about their art, their process, and the nerdy stuff that inspires them. From the secrets behind their craft to the ins and outs of the business to the games, shows, and books that they just can't get enough of, it's a unique and candid look at the people who create the stuff that you and I love. Now, comments are going to be open throughout the show here on Twitch, and although we can't make promises, we'll probably try to pull in some of your comments as we go along if I can grab some along the way. So let's not wait any longer. I want to introduce this week's guest, Kat Rambo. Kat, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hey, it's great to have you here. So for folks who maybe don't recognize your name right off, tell me a little bit more about you and what you do. Tell me a little bit more about your craft.
Well, first off, it is in fact my real name. We'll get that question out of the way. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer. I have written and have published over 250 fiction publications, the vast majority of which are short stories. You know that because you've actually bought one of my short stories at one point.
Yeah. How many did you say?
Over 250 now.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a long list. That's fantastic.
And yeah, I do a lot of writing. I do some editing. I just co-edited a book with Jen Brozak. I do a certain amount of gaming and teaching, and I used to be the president of SIPA for 2 terms, which was lovely.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on the show. I think that we're going to have a lot of cool stuff to talk about. One of the things you mentioned is we're going to talk a lot about the things you write, but I do want to talk a little bit about something you literally just mentioned, the book that you co-edited, an anthology of short stories. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it is? What's sort of the theme and the idea behind it?
Well, this actually had a kind of odd beginning, which is Shahid Mahmood of Arc Manor said, would you be interested in editing an anthology about the future of relationships by all female authors? And being my contrary self, I said, well, how about if we make sure, that it's not just romantic relationships, but friendships and family stuff and just like all sorts of relationships in the future. And I also suggested we expand it so it would be women and non-binary authors, which I thought might be a good way to do it. And then I proceeded to bail on the project. And I said, gosh, Shahid, yeah, I said I'd do this, but I'm too busy. How about you talk to my friend Jennifer Brozak, because she's awesome and has edited literally dozens of anthologies by now. And Jen said, how about we co-edit it? And we actually we're now in the process of co-editing a second one. We are doing what we call the Reinvented Anthology series. So the next one is the Reinvented Detective. And now we're about to fight to the death. Well, maybe not the death, to figure out what our next thing that we reinvent is. I'm pushing for Reinvented Coin because I think it would be fun to do stories about kind of economic stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want to fight to the death because then you have to do all the editing yourself, right? So it's really not a good thing.
That's it. I don't even want to maim her. I don't want to harm her in a way that would hurt her productivity at all. So.
Understood. Well, that sounds very cool. And I think one of the things can we just talk about anthologies because you've written so many short pieces. A lot of folks I don't think understand like how anthologies come about. And an anthology is a collection of short stories, but it's not just a bunch of random stories that were just picked up and thrown into a book together, typically, is it?
Oh, yeah. I think just about every anthology has some sort of editorial vision behind it. I mean, even when it's a year's best anthology, there's always some sort of theme. And we're in the middle right now of, I think, a huge anthology renaissance driven by Kickstarter and other crowdfunding, because I'm just seeing so many anthologies. So usually an editor comes up with an idea. They manage to talk some publisher into funding it, or else figure out how to do a Kickstarter. And then they often it's a mix of stories, kind of a mix of stories that you've actively solicited, which is what we did, and then some from the slush pile So Reinvented Heart is, I think it's like, I want to say 2/3 solicited and a third stuff from the slush pile.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to ask about because it seems like more and more the slush pile doesn't exist for a lot of these. And thinking about authors who are trying to break their way into these things, are there other ways to sort of get invited to these, to find your way into these that in the
Well,
modern sort of world of this?
uh, well, I mean, there's the old-fashioned, time-honored tradition of schmoozing, where
Right.
other than that, I think, keeping an eye open on the SIFWA blog will at least tell you when and the submission grinder will tell you when ones are opening. But often, if it's a closed one, you certainly can write to an editor and say, gee, I've got a story that I think would be amazing for this.
Mhm.
And in which case they may well say no. Other than that, it's hard, really
Yeah.
pretty hard.
Well, and I think that that's something that people may underestimate is the value of schmoozing even today. I mean, everyone's like, "Oh, it's all online and everything," but even with things online, most of the connections that I see get made a lot of times are at a convention, sitting
Yeah,
around in the bar afterward or talking
yeah,
to someone at a table or overhearing something, It seems to just be super important still. And now that COVID is changing,
yeah.
you know.
Well, and I think people overlook the fact that schmoozing has kind of a second layer to it. Like you meet somebody at a con, you hit it off, and then perhaps you do a story for them or whatever. But kind of the follow up is that you're pleasant to work with. You turn the
Yeah.
paperwork in on time. This came up in an Origins panel recently, which is if somebody asks you to pinch hit, right? They say, "Hey, I need a story for this anthology." And you're good about delivering something fast and decent, then they will call on you for others. So it is important to be good, I think, and responsive to editors.
So for a long time, about 7 years, I ran the Gen Con Writer Symposium, and which because you took part, which is
Yeah,
awesome. And one of the things that came up there is that oftentimes people would meet, uh, new writers. I don't say not young, but inexperienced writers who are trying to break in those sorts of educational panels, maybe in the
yeah,
workshops and things like that.
yeah,
And it seems like that's kind of a neat way that there have been times where someone said, "Wow, I read your paper or read your story, or you read some of it out loud. Would you like to write for an anthology?" And I mean, that's like sort of schmoozing that doesn't involve
yeah.
going up and trying to make friends, which is hard for a lot of folks, right?
Oh,
To
yeah.
pull that
Oh,
off in the
so
bar.
hard.
Yeah. But as far as education opportunities go, I do want to talk about the Rambo Academy. So can you tell a little bit about that so folks know what that is?
Yeah. The Rambo Academy for Wayward Writers is an online entity that's been around for over 10 years now. I started teaching online back when Google Hangouts first came out, and I was like, "Ooh, this looks like a good way to teach." And then, of course, they went away at some point, and now I do Zoom, which I know no one has ever heard of, this little known technology.
Right.
Um, so I teach online. I do both live and on-demand classes. And the kind of cool thing for me is that I've started bringing in other people. And my philosophy, honestly, I did this at one point. This is how I got Henry Ling teaching for me. Was I saw he'd given a class for Clarion West, and I was like, I want to take that class. And so I was like, Henry, come teach the class for me. And so I get to every weekend I get to sit in on at least one or two classes taught by just world class people, which is super exciting.
No, that's very cool. Well, and I think that, those sorts of opportunities, whether it's the Rambo Academy, which at first I was disappointed did not include like rocket launchers and building traps in the forest, but it's just as cool that you're teaching writing at the Rambo Academy.
Yeah,
Um, things like the conferences, writing conferences, gaming conferences. Gen Con's got a writing track that's going to be starting
yeah,
up again this year. So there are lots of chances for people out there to experience these and get to meet folks and talk to them.
yeah. And I would certainly urge people not to self-select out. I mean, like for one thing, I have
Mhm.
3 free scholarships in each class, which is needs based, and all you have to do is say, to apply is simply say I couldn't afford this otherwise, or this is stretches my budget, and here's why I'd like to take the class.
That's awesome, because that is one thing that often feels like a huge barrier, right? People look
Oh
at
yeah.
something and think like, "There's no way I can afford to do this." I mean, especially if you look at some of the big ones, right? And they're talking about like $900 a day and this
Oh,
stuff. You're like
oh,
going, "Oh my God," right?
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing. We got the conferences. You can go on a writing cruise and spend
Right.
thousands if you want to. But I think it's really important to make sure that everybody's got access, and so that's my way of trying to make sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So speaking of writing, the one of the things I want to know about in part because like I was telling you earlier, my wife came back said, "Hey, I just saw one of Kat's books at the library." I was like, "Yeah, it's cool." So I wanted you to tell us a little bit about You Sexy Thing.
You Sexy Thing is the name of the ship, the spaceship. It's a premise where there's a group of retired mercenaries that have started a restaurant on a space station. And the space station is the restaurant's doing very well, to the point where a restaurant critic is about to arrive and possibly give them a coveted nickel and orb. And then a mysterious package arrives, things start exploding, and they are forced to steal You Sexy Thing, an intelligent spaceship that is not convinced it really wants to be stolen. So that's one of the first obstacles they have to overcome. It's so much fun to write. I love these characters, and I've finished book 2. I'm working on book 3, and I adore them. And I think I would probably keep writing them happily for the rest of my life, but I should give them a happy end at some point.
Yeah, I'm going to show here's the book to cover.
Yeah.
That's all that I've got to be revealed. So we're going to have to wait to see that.
I have seen what is to be revealed, and they have taken. It's the same artist. The artist's name is Mike Heath,
Hmm.
and he has done an amazing job and taken one of the particularly spectacular bits of the book and
Oh,
used that.
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to see that. That's awesome. So one of the things that I heard you say once is you referred to space opera when you were talking about this. I mean, how do you define that? What is it that makes this, or that makes some of the elements of this space opera, would you say?
Well, I think space opera is often, it has lots of big universe spanning elements. So it's
Hmm.
got governments and revolutions and, various empires. Um, and I think that's for me what makes it space opera, although it's usually kind of far enough in the future that it doesn't really resemble ours too closely. Although I would count The Expanse as space
Hmm.
opera, and it's not that far in the future.
It kind of makes me think that it's the space version of epic fantasy in a way, is kind of
That's
what
it.
it makes me think of, right? Where you've got these massive powers that are changing everything as people know it, and they're clashing against one another, and you end up with some poor sap caught in the middle
Yep.
throughout this
Yep.
process.
That's a great way of thinking of it. I'm actually going to tuck that away for use
No,
later on. I'll
oh,
credit
good.
you.
Thank you. Excellent. Oh yeah. Well, you've written, like you said, more than 250 short stories, but you've also written novels. And I mean, how different is that for you? I mean, is it for you personally, is it harder to do novels? Is it
Oh,
feel just the
well, I
same?
mean, it just, for one thing, it's a much bigger time commitment. I mean, I can sit down, and if it's a short story, I may be able to finish it in one sitting and have a decent
Hmm.
draft. Whereas with a novel, it's much more of a slog. Um, I used to write novels with this sort of process of accretion where I'd sort of wander in and be like, all right, this scene today. All right, this scene today.
Hmm.
And I have discovered that adds so much work in the end when it comes time to edit that draft that I have abandoned that approach. And now I try to start at the book's beginning and write all the way through. Although I will admit there's sometimes things like insert epiphany here or remember to go back and make this make sense.
Right. Well, I think that's some of the, when people talk about revising, that a lot of folks don't recognize is that sometimes revising literally means putting a chapter in and saying
Oh
like, I
yeah.
do not know how to tell this part of the story, but I
Yep.
know what I want to happen.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's what I think when you write that first draft, you're just trying to kind of pin it down on the page,
Hmm.
just trying to get an idea of what it's like. And I never go into that process thinking, oh my goodness, this needs to be a publishable draft, because to me, that's the best way to paralyze myself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and we always, in our writers group, we always like to remind each other. We have a small group of about 4 people, and we like to remind one another that you can fix garbage, but you can't fix a blank page, right?
That's it.
A page is nothing, but at least if there's something there, you've got something to work with,
Yeah.
something to polish, something to get feedback on.
Well,
Do you have anybody? Oh, go ahead.
I'm saying, and that's one of the things I think newer writers need to realize is you have to give yourself permission to write a shitty draft, because nobody is writing perfect first drafts, or if they are, they're not telling the rest of us, because we would hunt them down and kill them.
So do you have anyone that you bounce your stuff off of as you're writing, other than an editor? Do you have a friend or a group?
I send it to my spouse. And that is how I know something is done, is when I'm ready to run it past Wayne. So.
Oh, awesome. So it gives you your critique of, how it, and so how tough of a critic is Wayne?
I mean, like, he's not, he's not coming from a literary background, so he's kind of reading it at a gut level. But boy, he doesn't pull punches if he doesn't, like something. So yeah, he's pretty honest. But he likes my stuff, luckily, so that's good.
Well, that's good, right? Because then, yeah, I know. So my wife is into mysteries and cop novels and things like that, and she does not read what I write at all. And so I'm always like, she reads it, but it's really just a pity read because she loves me, and but it's not her thing most of the time. She's like, I don't really understand what happened. It's something about magic, but
These are nice words, Mark. These are nice words.
Exactly. You wrote it really well. I just don't know.
There's a lot of them. It looks like you really thought.
Exactly. Well, she will tell me if she finds it difficult to read or it's poorly written, because she is a good judge of that. But
good.
She's not into she's like, well, if you tell me that people who like fantasy are going to get this, then go for it. So.
Yeah.
So speaking of writing, one of the things that, I for a very long time looked at as a writer when I was growing up, when I was really young, and even once I started writing, was SFWA, the Science Fiction Writers of America. And it's a professional organization specifically to help and support writers. How else would you describe it more than that? I mean, but the reason I ask is that you were actually president of SFWA for 2 terms, and so you probably know how to describe it better than I do.
Well, it started because some of the big name authors realized that basically anybody who wasn't a big name author was getting treated very shabbily by the publishers. And so it was started by a handful of people, including Heinlein, Joe Haldeman, and I think Asimov was in there, just like a whole bunch of people. That was over 50 years ago. And it has grown. I think it's over like 2,000 members now. And it has always been about the closest thing to a trade union that science fiction and fantasy writers have. It has worked. It does things like it has audited publishers in order to make sure they're paying people. Right now, they've been pursuing Disney legally. You may have known the stuff with Disney who not paying Alan Dean Foster and a number of other writers. So they've been working on that. There's things like the Grievance Committee, which is there specifically to help writers that are having trouble with a specific publisher or editor. And what's been really amazing in the time since I have worked with it, and this is a process that I'm happy to have helped kick off. They have admitted independently published writers, including crowdfunding. I think was the first writers organization to look at that as criteria. They admitted game writers, comic book writers, and they've just recently changed the membership requirements to make it even more open to the newer writers who may be the ones that most need it.
Yeah. And SF, I think that's the thing, is that SF is no longer really the full definition of who's welcomed into the organization and who the organization can help. And I think that that's one of the things, is that when you're a writer and you don't have an agent, which most writers don't, you're basically on your own from a business perspective, right? You're trying to figure out contracts. You're trying to figure out whether you can trust people, and it's tough.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the things I was really proud of having gotten kind of revamped was I got the contracts committee putting together even more example contracts and ways to educate people. So if you go and look at the SIFA website, you can find, for example, a sample contract from a magazine. And it's not just a sample contract, it's a sample contract that's glossed. So like every paragraph is explained and says, okay, this is what you should expect in this paragraph. If it says this, that's kind of weird, you should push back on it. And so that's you know, teaching people and educating writers is, I think, one of its most important aspects.
How much of that have you guys gotten into for the game industry, for game industry writers, for game industry designers, in terms of contracts and sort of going through them and what to expect in like work for hire situations?
Answer to that is I have not a clue. Because they came in, they started coming in just as I was heading out, and the game writing committee is on that. I would suspect there's at least I would hope there's at least a few game contracts, but most of the contracts there have arisen because somebody wrote in and said, hey, I need an audio narrator contract. Or one of the things I pointed out to them was there's a lot of anthologies. Could we get an anthology contract in there? So.
Oh, that's great. And I think that one thing that's nice about that is that's good not just for the writers, but it's for people who want to publish and publish right.
Yes.
We all know the bad publishers, but there are a lot of folks out there who are trying to do it right, and they just don't know what to do. They're making it up as they go along.
That is exactly, I mean, the main reason why I tried to get that magazine contract revamped when I was in office, and did so because people needed it, and publishers were writing in and saying, hey, I went and looked at the old version and it seems, I don't know, like 20 years out of date.
Yeah.
It doesn't mention electronic stuff. How can that be?
Right. Well, I mean, and that's one of the things is that any sort of an organization like that, there's a lot of work that goes into keeping all of that up to date and accessible and accurate and useful. I mean, as you're going along. But that's one of the nice things about having a lot of people involved is that you open up to a lot of different backgrounds and experience and stuff you can draw on.
Oh yeah. And that was one of the nicest things about bringing the indie writers in, is they came in and they had energy and enthusiasm and above all experience, and experience with stuff that a lot of the traditionally published writers did not, such as how to market and how to promote and what is this book bug thing, that sort of stuff.
So let me ask you, something about indie writers that I want to ask about is that it's the concept of the self-published author, I feel, has changed dramatically just over like the last 10 years, where prior to that, self-published usually got labeled with the negative vanity press connotation, right?
And I think it probably justifiably, because vanity presses were basically, I kind of think, the way most of that stuff was appearing. And so you were getting just, you know, there's so many people out there that want to make money off writers, and they want to make money particularly off wannabe writers, and the vanity presses were just terrible about that. And
so a lot of people probably don't even know what a vanity press is.
Yeah.
You know? So
well, let me just say to anybody who's thinking about publishing, anytime somebody comes to you and says, I will publish you, but you need to give me money, that is a vanity press. That is a scam, and you should bop them in the nose and run away. Maybe skip the bopping in the nose is optional. I'm not actually advocating violence, but yeah. And there's plenty of writing contests that will be like, okay, send us a $25 entry fee. And, you know, there's just a lot of people trying to make money off writers. But nowadays, self-published people, they really are self-publishing in that they are becoming their own little publishing house, and they are taking care of the book production and the editing, or, you know, hiring somebody perhaps, or doing it themselves, and cover design and all the stuff that normally the publisher does.
Yeah, and there's, you know, that's one of the things where there's a difference between saying you need to pay someone to design your cover, you need to pay someone to edit your book, and you need to pay me to make a profit off of you. That's where the problem comes in, right? When those vanity press are, that's really how they work, and they don't really go out of their way to help the person make a top quality product, which is one of the
Oh, they
challenges.
don't.
Well,
Yeah,
right.
they don't deliver. They'll do stuff like yeah, they will say, oh, we're going to hire an editor. You're going to pay for that, and then not actually hire an editor. Just
Hmm.
all sorts of unscrupulous stuff.
But that has changed, right? I mean, now we're in a position where, like you said, folks are literally self-publishing. They are hiring editors and artists and layout and design people, and they're becoming extremely successful doing this,
Oh yeah.
as long as they're following the rules of putting out a really top quality product along the way.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's cool that you guys, you know, that SIFWA was able to bring that in and sort of help to sort of identify, you know, how do you draw the line? How do you embrace that and sort of
Yeah.
move us in that direction?
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you know, I say this because I know of a lot of authors who, you know, like one of my friends, Elizabeth Vaughan. She is a USA Today best-selling author. She published books through Tor, but then she wanted to continue the series after Tor was like, well, yeah, we're happy. That's enough
Yeah.
books for us. And she said, well, I want to write some more books. So she just did them herself. But she's using the same methods. But the reality is that they're doing really well. And it's kind of interesting to me. I don't know how much of this you see, Cap, but the line between a book that does well and a book that the big publishers actually want is really interesting to me, where they'll be like, no, this book, we're not going to pick it up. And you're like going, but anyone else would say 50,000 copies is awesome, right?
Yeah. I'm similarly flummoxed by that. And I think part of it, though, is that the big publishers they're so unwieldy
Yeah.
that they end up kind of not being able to handle anything but the really big sellers. And I think one of the advantages that self-published people have is that they're so much more agile. And of course, one of the best examples of that would be Chuck Tingle. I mean, who literally, like, there's a new scandal. Whoops, here's a book, right? And you're just like, okay. But the self-published people can really kind of play to the market in a way that traditionally published people can't.
Now, one of the things that we talked a little with some of the authors about, though, is that no matter who publishes your book, you end up selling your books yourself a lot. And I know that even this over Origins, I was there, you were selling your books. Well, you were there, right? You're there talking to people, and you were your own, you know, pitch person and interesting person to talk to and stock person and everything. It's all in one.
Yeah, I used to work at a bookstore, and I loved working in a bookstore, and I loved recommending books for people. And so I like working conventions. I would rather work a table with somebody else's books, to be quite frank. But what I'll do sometimes is team up with a friend whose books I like, and then you know, this works out super well because it's so much easier to recommend somebody else's book. Because like if you're holding yours up, you're kind of like, here's my child, they're very smart.
Exactly.
You know.
I don't know. I also have a really hard time like talking about my stuff in a pitch sort of way, because I'm like going, you know, I think it's awesome, but I don't want to sound like I'm too full of myself. But you know, it's hard to do that.
And at the same time, you have to have some amount of self-confidence, right? Because you don't want to be like pushing a book at somebody, go, I think it's kind of crappy, but maybe you want to buy it, right?
Weirdly, that doesn't work. It's just not a good selling pitch. It doesn't work. You don't put that in a blurb on the cover. I think it's kind of crappy, but maybe you'll buy it anyway, you know. Marc Tassin.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to change gears. I want to talk a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons, because I know you've been playing forever. You know, we're on Gen Con TV. We should talk about role-playing games. So you're gaming right now, right? Playing D&D with a group. And this is a group that sort of came back from, well, I don't know, back from the dead's the right word, but you know, you revivified your group. Is that true?
Well, I moved back to the town that I grew up in, and discovered, and a friend invited me to the D&D group, and I was like, these are the people I played D&D with in high school. So
that's awesome.
So I have, in fact, Saturday we'll be playing again. I'm super excited.
Well, what edition are you guys playing?
5e.
5e. Okay. So 5e. The group is playing 5e today, and, you know, pushed forward with some of that. I personally am a big 1E fan, but I also play 5E most of the time as
That's
well.
it.
And have
Well,
you played 5E before this, or?
yeah, I had, and it kind of strangely enough, the thing that got me back into 5E was another game, which was the Esper Genesis game that Greg
Mm,
Wilson runs, which is based on the 5E system, but is basically sort of like D&D in space.
yeah.
And so that got me back. And then I started when the pandemic hit. I actually talked to a friend that had been doing a tabletop campaign, and I was like, how about we do a D&D Zoom thing so none of us go crazy. And that group has been going, yeah, we're meeting on Thursday. We've been going basically every week for the last 2.5 years or so.
So not only you're gaming in multiple groups right now, which is
I have gaming in
yeah,
multiple groups.
that's
That
awesome.
is my way.
And is your weekend group, are they doing Zoom as well, or is that in person now? Or have you guys managed
It's
to get
in
that?
person.
Oh,
It's in
awesome.
person with a few people dialing in.
Got it. Yeah, I think it's really amazing the options that, everyone's talking about this, but honestly, it's still just so cool that we
Oh
can game
yeah.
in ways we never could before, thanks to the technology that we've got.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, and Roll20 is awesome for playing on.
Mhm. Yeah, I was going to ask you if you used Roll20 or,
Yep.
do you guys use the full gamut of all the features and the functionality, or do you use it more just as a virtual tabletop? Everyone uses a different level of
Everybody
software.
uses it differently. I have had DMs that were kind of used like the spell effects and the dynamic lighting and all that. Um, I have found with our current group, we usually skip a lot of that stuff rather than sit there for 20 minutes fiddling with the dynamic lighting, right?
Right. Like, can you see now? No, I can't see. Now can
Oh
you see?
God.
No, I can't see. Oh, you don't have
I
your
can
torch
see
lit.
I can see what you don't want me to see, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that as a game master, I love so much of that cool stuff, but occasionally I just find we get submerged in the
Oh yeah.
using the tool as opposed to playing the
Yeah.
game, and it's tough to sometimes find your balance there.
Yeah. I'm going to run at some point a campaign based on Powered by the Apocalypse, which is a very cinematic game. And so I've been actually
Yeah.
kind of looking for sound clips to use with that.
Oh, cool. That's
I
very
think that would
cool.
work well.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to do some online 5E, but I think most of it's going to be largely just graphics on screen and theater of the mind, because I want to play with a
Yeah.
lot of strangers who I haven't played with before, and I don't feel like I can throw that at some folks who would be like, I
Yeah.
really want to play, but I can't learn Roll20 in time to get into the game. We use
Yeah.
Fantasy Grounds right now. We've used Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, Tailspire, Forge, or Foundry. So we've used all of them in our group, but yeah, they're great, the stuff they can do. But for a newer group, it is nice just go old school and say, all right, everyone just
Yeah.
imagine you're in a room with
Yeah.
orcs. Start
Yeah.
fighting. So have you played other games as well over the years, or is
Oh
D&D?
yeah.
Okay.
I have played Champions and GURPS and Call of Cthulhu and Bunnies and Burrows and Tunnels and Trolls. In fact, my first marriage, my brother actually ran the party that the bride has the night before, and it was a game of Call of Cthulhu that then at the very last minute turned out to be Paranoia, which we hadn't realized. So.
That is the best bachelorette party ever. That's fantastic. See, and this is why I wanted to talk to you about this, because a lot of authors have played a little bit, but I knew that we could talk a bit about how much game you've played, how many different games you've played. Now, over the years, other than D&D, what other games have been especially near and dear to your heart as you play them?
Well, I will confess that Champions
Hmm.
and just the kind of sitting there methodically shaving points and fiddling out the numbers had a certain appeal.
Yeah.
Um, RuneQuest actually is
Hmm.
another one that I liked a lot. I mean, Call of Cthulhu might be the one that I really kind of grooved on because I really like horror. That was a lot of fun to run.
Would you say you're more of a system person or a setting person?
Um, More of a setting, I think. I don't.
Mhm.
Yeah, the system is. Yeah, whatever we're gonna do is good.
As long as you can tell a good story as you go along.
That's it. That's it.
Well, and I think
And that's
that's
why
oh, go ahead.
that's why I like the Powered by the Apocalypse games, is because of the still kind of the storytelling aspect to that is I think can be a lot of fun, and you can be very cinematic with it. And it's cool.
Wait, you're a writer and you like the storytelling aspects of it? I'm just
I
completely
know,
shocked by
weird,
that,
huh?
right? Who would have thought? Oh, and now I do have a question, is that for you, telling stories is sort of second nature. For other people at the gaming table, sometimes it's not. How do you, like, do you run typically or do you play typically?
Um,
Or
I
both?
think it's about 50-50. I do both. I'm lucky enough to know some very good game masters. Greg Wilson, who we both know,
Yeah.
is just an alarmingly good game master, and my brother, Lowell Francis, who will be familiar to some Gen Conites. You may remember him being nominated for an Emmy a number of years ago.
Uh-huh.
He is, I think, the best game master in the world. I will put him up against anyone, although Greg's pretty good too. So
I think we've just heard a challenge, folks. So just letting you know.
I'll let him know. Lowell, I volunteered you. You're going to be fighting all the other DMs to the death.
Well, and when you're gaming with other folks and when you're telling stories, I mean, how much of the storytelling is the same as what you do when you're writing versus completely different? Is it anywhere connected at all, do you think? Have you ever thought about that?
I have. I think that one of the pieces that's different. I don't know. I was thinking that kind of like sinking into the character is a little different. Because
Yeah.
like when you're a writer, you're kind of viewing everything from above and you're less kind of like inside the character. But at the same time, as a writer, you do want to be a little bit inside that character at least. Um, I think the thing about writing is you don't have that hideous random die roll factor that you do in gaming, right? You
Uh-huh.
know, actually, a long time ago, I went to Dragon Con, and Anne Crispin, I don't know if you, Anne Crispin was
Hmm.
a great science fiction writer, but she used to do the Dragon Con writing workshop. And she said, if you're going to do something based on a game, you're going to have to adapt it entirely because there's so much stuff where it's like, it's clear that a dice was rolled and a choice, that's what happened.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they've talked about is when converting your story, your game into a story, not letting people hear the dice roll is what they always say.
Yep.
So, but I mean, you can do it. Like The Expanse, for
Oh,
example,
yeah.
is a great
Oh, yeah.
example. Dragonlance, there are stories that did come out of games
Yeah.
that you can do it, but it is a different animal. So, speaking of these sorts of things, I want to talk about something called a multi-user dungeon, which a ton of people won't know what it is at all. But it's basically, if anyone has ever played Zork, which I'm also going to explain that because I know people don't necessarily know, there were these
Yeah.
games, text games, where it would say things like, you are standing in a room, there's a door, and you'd have to type in tick, 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 open door. And it would say, I don't see a door here. And you go, I mean, open wooden door. And it would say, the wooden door opens. And that's how you play the game, is typing this in. Well, someone got the bright idea to let everybody play at the same time, creating something called a multi-user dungeon, which was the
Mhm.
predecessor of Worlds of Warcraft and all of these games, a pure text-based multi-user game, which sounds
Yep.
crazy when I say it out loud, but you did this a lot, my understanding.
Well, I'll tell you something even crazier, which is that the mud that I worked with for so long is still around and going strong in
Hmm.
its text-based form. So yeah, I that's where I learned to code by looking at the magic spells and trying to figure out how to code new ones. It's where I think I picked most of my computer skills. In fact,
Hmm.
I started playing on a Daiku, uh,
Hmm.
which anybody that's mud like, oh, Daiku,
Yeah,
but
it's one of the
called
languages. Yeah,
that's it, called
Mudlips.
Dark Castle. And then I ended up going to Armageddon, which was
Hmm.
the first role play required
Hmm.
mud, and also had permadeath, which
Mm.
taught me a lot of people skills because you can imagine having to deal with players whose character of 2 years had just died, and you had to explain that nope, nope, that dead was dead.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
I think the thing that was fascinating about MUDs is that, a lot of the terminology and the things that we see, like a tell or things like that, they were born out of those MUDs and the commands that you
Oh
used
yeah.
in those. And you were talking about computer. What a lot of folks don't know is that in a lot of these MUDs, when you hit a certain level, you could become a wizard. You could become a
Yeah.
programmer, and you'd start expanding this world. So it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you go along. And a lot of folks, like it sounds like you and me, my degree is opera performance, which has been not particularly useful to me over the years. But when I was supposed to be doing my homework in college, I was programming LPC on a MUD.
Yeah.
And, and that's where I learned computers and what I do for my day job today. And, but it's just fascinating, that sort of collective storytelling where you're literally building a world from the ground up.
Oh, for sure. And I think it did teach a lot of people, because like that's how I ended up picking up the skills that took me to Microsoft eventually. So, yeah.
Well, and the thing is that you were saying how Armageddon MUD is still around. In the old days, you had to have Telnet and hopefully find the server and, try to figure out what the IP address was. Now, most of these are just in browsers. And so, folks, if you're interested in playing MUDs, just Google it. You will find it. There are MUDs out there to play, and they are still a ton of fun to play in. So have you gone back to Armageddon? And
I don't dare. I really don't dare. And I keep getting like players keep mailing me and are like, hey, like you could just make a character and sit in the tavern, and I was just like, no, because, honestly, when I started writing seriously, I had to give up some addictions, and Armageddon was one. And then at one point, I did get pretty heavy into World of Warcraft at one point, and then I was just like, wow, I am looking at the amount of time I'm putting in World of Warcraft, and my wrists hurt. And if my wrists are going to hurt, I'd rather hurt them writing than playing.
That's so true, because I'll admit that one of the things I always say is that, I do have a problem, and my problem is online multiplayer role-playing games. I've tried a couple just for fun with my friends, but I just don't go there because they just suck me in.
They do.
And they're just so hard to break away from.
And Armageddon had all these kind of complicated politics, like there's 2 city-states, and you had, like all this stuff going on. And it felt like, like whenever you weren't logged in, you were missing the story, right? Because the story's going on without you. And I apologize, my cat is...
That's all right. It just wants to join in and answer some questions. That's fine. It has opinions about Armageddon MUD. Well, I think though that the world's leaving you behind at that point when you're not in there in that other world.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, is true about anyone, whether you're writing or doing games or anything, is that there are sacrifices. And if you're not willing to make those, it's going to be really tough to impossible to achieve what you want to achieve. And it sounds like that's been true for you as well. There's some things you have to say goodbye to.
Yeah, and part of the problem is I'm a somewhat addictive personality, so I have a hard time being like, I will just play for X number of minutes a day, because I get in there, I'm going to be like, oh my God, 4 hours have gone by and I leveled, right?
Yeah, people are like, you set a timer. I'm like, so I can ignore it.
That's exactly it. So you can reset it, right?
Right, or reset the timer and do it again. Yeah, maybe, I don't know if I'm proud or not proud of this, but I did a 21-hour stint once on one of the MUDs, going straight from first level to wizard, blowing all the way through. So, it's easy to get sucked in on those.
I remember sleeping on a table in the computer laboratory because I was so tired.
And a computer lab, kids, is a place where there were computers where you'd go to use them at certain times of day when it was open. Unless, of course, you were mudding and your friends worked in the computer lab and they'd sneak you in at night, which was not really helpful to my grades. Nope. All of that aside, though, I think that it's really cool. And people who don't know, it's worth just checking it out. Go out there, look at them, assuming you can do it safely without becoming addicted like some of us. Go out and check them out because they're very, very cool. And it's a cool way to do role playing.
It really is.
So we have covered a lot of ground. Let me just take a quick look here. So what have you got coming up next? Right now, it sounds like The Devil's Gun is the big thing that you've got coming up.
So I just turned in the edits on Devil's Gun, and I'm working this month. I'm trying to finish up, and it's going to end up going into next month too, though. Finishing up the last fantasy novel. I have a quartet, and this is book 4, Gods of Tibet. And I would like to get that done,
Yeah.
because my feeling is sometimes people don't buy series until the last book is out. And so it
Yeah.
would be nice to have the last book out.
So this is the series here, right? The Beasts of Tibet,
Mhm.
the first one.
Starts with
Is it
Beasts of
Tibet or
Tibet.
Tibet?
I say Tibet, but I'm from the Midwest, so it's probably Tibet, or but
I Tibet. Then there's Hearts, and
Heart
then there are Exiles, right?
Exiles. And the
And
fourth book is Gods of
okay.
Tibet.
And what is the idea of this series? What is it about?
So it is set in a world where the intelligent magical creatures, the centaurs and unicorns and manticores, are basically enslaved by the humans. And the humans use them for labor, and the humans actually use their bodies to work magic, in that a lot they can be used for magical components.
Hmm.
And there's a complex social system justifying all of this. And it's a moment of revolution when the beasts are starting to say, hey, we don't actually think this is how things should be.
Hmm.
And kind of playing out across that is a gladiator who is sort of the heart of the city, and with some magical implications to being the heart of the city.
Oh, that's fantastic. And these you can get these on Amazon. You can get
Mhm.
these. Where would you direct folks to look for these titles?
I would tell them to you can order them through your local bookstore, which you should support. Or
Yes.
if you are an audiobook person, they are all available on audio as well.
Okay. Very cool. And are you exploring any new ideas? I mean, obviously you don't have to, you won't tell us, but you shouldn't. But I mean, do you have like secret projects in the works while
I,
you're
I,
doing all of this?
I do. Well, one's not so secret. One's this novella that I started working on when I was at Norwestcon a few months ago. And I was sort of irritated with it because I was like, I have other I'm sorry, I have other stuff to do. Sorry. Um, but this novella sort of the characters intruded and said we would like to be written. So when I have free time, I've been kind of picking away at that. And I've got a few stories that I'm working on. And then I am super excited about this game that I'm going to run,
Ooh.
which is, I'm not going to tell you who's going to play in it, but I will say it's other writers, and I am so freaking stoked to have them as players. You
Oh, I can't
cannot
wait.
believe.
That's going to be awesome. I can't wait to hear more about this. So
Yeah, yeah.
if we go to your website, we can probably, when the time comes, that would probably be a good place to find out about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay. Awesome. And this is going to be like a live actual play sort of thing, or are you just
Yeah,
doing
it's
it for
actually
yourself?
I pitched it to Greg
Hmm.
Wilson, because
Yeah.
he's got a Twitch channel, and I thought, well, if I use Greg's Twitch, then I don't have to worry about setting up all that stuff. And Greg likes getting content, so I was like, how about I do this once a month thing? And here's what I want to do. It's actually what I want to do is, I'll tell you the premise. It's all the players will be supernatural creatures in a retirement village for supernatural creatures.
That's fantastic.
Right?
I love it. Well, we are short on time at this point. Um, I don't know if there is anything in particular that occasionally we'll try to think if we have somebody special that we want to sort of highlight or put a spotlight on.
I,
Um,
I do have I
oh,
do
okay,
have
cool.
someone, and that is the excellent Emily Bell of Athos Arts. She and her husband Chris Bell run Athos Arts, and she writes under the name EDE Bell, capital E, capital D, capital E, and she's written a lovely series called Diamond Song, which is kind of quiet, lovely fantasy. And I want to heartily recommend Diamond Song and Emily's work and all of the Athos art stuff, because they are putting out some really neat stuff. And people
Okay.
that were Origins will know him from doing the Origins anthology. Can I mention Origins?
I don't think you can mention Origins Anthology, but yes, of course. And this is Athos Arts here, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So, and Diamond Song is the piece that is the book that you're talking about. So that's
yeah,
something that they can find there on the site
yeah,
then.
yep.
Very cool. And can you tell me your name one more time? I'm making a note for myself even so that I make sure that I go over
It's
there and grab it.
EDE Bell, Bell.
All right, got it. EDE Bell. Excellent. Well, we'll definitely check that out. Well,
Excellent.
we have about run out of time today. Thank you so much for
Oh,
meeting
thank
with us and
you.
talking to us. This has been fantastic. Where are you going to be next as far as cons or traveling about?
I will be at Gen Con. That is my
Fantastic.
next convention. I'm
I
very
did not
excited.
set that up on purpose. That just was perfectly that way. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, Kat, and we'll talk to
Thank
you
you.
again soon. Talk
Awesome.
to you
Take
later.
care.
Well, everyone, that's it. We've run out of time. We have finished off another great conversation with another fantastic creator. Next week, we will be talking with David Mack. David Mack is a fantastic author. He's written over 36 novels, including a host of, or maybe I should say, collective of Star Trek novels. And he's worked on things like Deep Space Nine and been an advisor on shows like Star Trek Lower Decks, which I love, and Star Trek Prodigy. So definitely stop by to see us. He's an all-around cool guy to talk to. And remember, right now, Kickstarter is still going on for my project, so please check it out. We'd love for you to take a look at it. Until then, that's it for now. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.